Good evening, dear all. We are so happy to see all of you joining via Zoom and Facebook. And we know that tomorrow is International Women's Day. So we congratulate all of you and our beautiful speaker on this occasion and wish you all prosperity, success, and lots of joy in your life. And today we are very happy to host our speaker. So she's incredible English language teacher as well as trainer. She's quite popular because all over Tajikistan everyone knows her, and more than that, she's extremely supportive to other teachers, and beside that, like she's always happy to lend her helping hand to other educators and teachers across Tajikistan. So Anna Lurie, and today she's going to talk about recognizing the today she's going to talk about the motivating learners consideration for educators. And Anna Lurie is an experienced educator who has dedicated 17 years to teaching. Her journey began as an English as a second language teacher in New York City and Ohio. Currently, she serves as an English language fellow in Tajikistan, and she is still doing great job, and also doing lots of webinars to other teachers of different regions as well. Anna holds an MST in teaching English to speakers of other languages from Pace University in New York City, and a BA in Women's Studies from Vassar College, New York. Notably, she achieved the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards certification in teaching English as a new language to adolescent and young adult learners. Congratulations on that. And dear all, please jump in, join the webinar, and ask your questions to our speaker after her presentation, and stay well and invest your time for your self-development. And with big pleasure, I'm giving the floor to our speaker, Anna Lurie. So welcome, Anna, and over to you. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Nasiba. I think you just made my Women's Day because that was the kindest introduction. And I really am just so happy to be here with you and with the entire EWB community. So thank you again. I will go ahead and share my screen now. Okay, let's see. Okay, great. Yes, so I don't think, first of all, I wanted to say a happy Women's Day, as Nasiba did, to all of the extremely hardworking women out there. I just wish you a wonderful celebration and a day of rest, lots of happiness. And for everyone who's getting a day off tomorrow, enjoy your time, and I wish you all the best. So, and thank you for being here with us tonight on the eve of Women's Day as you're getting ready for your celebrations. Nasiba did a great job in introducing me, so I don't think I really need to say much about myself. Just again, how pleased I am to be here with all of the teachers from Tajikistan and around the world. So we're going to talk about learner motivation tonight, which for me is a topic I love to talk about and something I care deeply about. And what I'm going to ask is that for those of you who are live in the Zoom, if you could help me by responding to some statements, whether or not you agree or disagree with the statements. So here's the first one. Some of my students seem unmotivated to learn. So if this is true for you now or maybe in the past, you can put 1 if you agree in the chat, 2 if you're kind of in the middle, or 3 if you disagree. Great. Okay. And if you are watching on Facebook, you can simply just reflect on these questions as we go through.
Yes,
Great. So,
Zoro can help us and forward those to us in Zoom.
okay, perfect. Wonderful. Okay, great. So I'll move on to the next one. Fun activities, awards, or prizes are the best way to motivate students to learn. So again, 1, 2, or 3. Okay, great. I'm seeing some 1s and 2s. Excellent. So I'll move on to the next statement. It depends on the student to be motivated to learn. 1, 2, or 3. Great. So we have a mix of responses there from 1 agree to 3 disagree. So let's keep moving. It doesn't really matter if students are motivated as long as they show up and do the work. 1, 2, or 3. Great. All right. Saw 3 on that one. Great. Let's go to the last one. Parents have a bigger responsibility to motivate children than teachers do. Agree, not sure, or disagree. Okay, getting in the middle. Agree. Okay, great. So thank you, everyone who responded or thought about that. These are just some statements to get us thinking about some of the issues that come up with student motivation. And I hope that they will be ideas that we can kind of circle back to see if our thinking changes on these at all. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. Certainly, you can argue one way or another, but I hope that in this webinar, you'll see that there is research that tells us something about student motivation, and hopefully it can change some of our thinking on some of these ideas. So, as all of you know well, as teachers, we are constantly overwhelmed with so much, and the things that you see on this screen, such as communicating with parents or what's going on in our personal life or grading, these aren't even things that are happening when we're teaching. So we're just constantly inundated with things that can cause stress, right? And it can be quite overwhelming to deal with everything we have to do. And so when we are confronted with unmotivated students in our classroom, which certainly I think probably every teacher has to deal with from time to time, that can feel really frustrating, annoying, upsetting. It can almost feel like a personal attack sometimes, in my experience. Um, when a student, you work so hard to make a good class, and then a student is coming and they're not motivated. It can be pretty upsetting and hit pretty deeply, in my opinion. And it can feel like, why should I have to worry about student motivation? I worry about everything else. Can't the student just show up and want to learn? We know how important it is that they are motivated in order to learn. And research is showing this more and more, that unmotivated students don't learn at the level that we need them to. We know students must be motivated. But it's pretty easy, as I was just talking about, when you're dealing with everything else, to think, why do I need to deal with student motivation? Um, why is that my problem? I certainly have heard these things from other teachers, and some of them I've thought or said myself in the past, you know, placing the blame on others outside of myself. Oh, my students aren't motivated because they're just using their phones all the time. They just want to be playing games, and that's the only reason that they aren't motivated, right? It doesn't have to do with my class, it has to do with what they're doing. Or society has changed, and if this was back when I was a kid, they wouldn't be acting this way. Or maybe we blame their parents and think their parents aren't doing a good job of raising them, or that maybe their parents are even too strict and only just care about their grades and don't actually care about their learning. So maybe these sound familiar to you. They certainly do to me. Um, but the fact of the matter is that it's really too easy and not helpful to look outside of ourselves when it's coming to student motivation. Research has shown that teachers are the number one most important factor in a student's learning, not their parents, not whether they're working in groups or what kinds of activities they're necessarily doing, but actually the teacher's presence and the teacher's relationship with students. The teacher is the most important factor, and that includes when it comes to motivating students. So even if we'd like to look elsewhere and place the blame outside of ourselves, or not blame, because I don't want to put more stress on any teacher, but just the responsibility. If we can't be constantly looking outside of ourselves, because the only thing that we can control is our classroom, right? We can't control what's happening in students' homes. We can't control what the trends are in society. We can't even necessarily control what the policies are in our own school systems. So, really, what we have to focus on is what we can control, which is what happens in our classroom. And, that's kind of a positive thing, too, because as I said, we are the most important factor in our students' learning, and we do have a lot of control over what happens within the four walls of our classroom. So, I take that as a positive. The other thing that I take as a positive is just how often the teachers that I work with here ask questions about student motivation. I would say it's really one of the number one questions that teachers come to me with is, oh, I have students who don't seem to care that much. Like, how can I get them motivated to learn English? And so I would say that in general, the teachers that I meet here are taking the responsibility on themselves. They believe that yes, we do have an influence on whether or not our students are motivated, and it's our job to help them be more motivated. So I really applaud all of you for that. And it makes me excited to talk about it with you. I've seen a few more people join on the Zoom. So hello, welcome. I'm happy to have you all here. And it's just fantastic. Happy pre-Women's Day. And let's continue. Okay. So we know student motivation is important, and we know we have a responsibility to cultivate it. So what does the research say about what is required? So there's a general consensus that there are 3 or 4 factors that are required to have learners be motivated to learn. And the first is a positive relationship with the teacher and with other students in the classroom. So we're talking about a sense of belonging, feeling like you're in a community, And I'm sure you can imagine that when you're in a community, there are so many benefits that come with that, from a sense of accountability, to feeling like it matters if you're there or not every day, to just the joy of being with other people, right? So, positive relationships, number one. Number two is choice, giving our students choices about what they learn, how they learn, um, at what pace, etc. And when we give students choice, this helps develop a sense of autonomy, which it means a feeling of being able to do it on their own, not relying on the teacher to just shove information into your brain, but actually um, to be like a independent learner, right? And choice also helps develop a sense of relevance, which means that students feel connected to what they're learning and like it relates to their life, like it's relating to their goals. Third, students must believe they can learn. And this is something that I think a lot of kids struggle with, right? They might not have, they're developing a sense of self esteem, and maybe they've had failure in the past. And so it's really important that we as teachers help them develop this sense of competency. Basically, I can, right? Maybe I can't do it yet, but I know that if I do certain steps, I can learn this, I can do it. And that is so important for motivation, because if you feel like, oh, it doesn't matter what I do, every time I try, I fail, then you're not going to be motivated for very long, right? And so all of these four categories, belonging, autonomy, relevance, and competency, come together to build a sense of intrinsic motivation, which is when students feel motivated because of their something within them, right? Their own goals or their character or something like that, rather than extrinsic motivation, which means motivation that comes from the outside, like prizes or fun activities or negative consequences like bad grades or something like that. And research is showing that intrinsic motivation is so much more effective in the long term than extrinsic motivation. So we need to be kind of cultivating all of these areas in our classrooms so that our students have the skills and understandings that help them develop that sense of intrinsic motivation that will keep them wanting to learn for the long haul. So now we're going to turn the mirror onto ourselves a little bit, and I'm going to lead you through some questions, and I'll ask you to contribute a little bit in the chat as well for these. We're going to think about how we are doing in each of those areas that I just mentioned. And the questions that I'm going to ask come from the wonderful Jennifer Gonzalez at the Cult of Pedagogy. She writes a blog and does a podcast about teaching, and I find it extremely useful. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely do in the future. I'll have a link to her blog in this presentation for later. And I really recommend that with these questions that we're going to go through now, certainly take the time to reflect on them now in this webinar, but maybe you can jot them down or come back to the presentation later, so that you can use them as a reflective tool whenever maybe you're feeling frustrated about student motivation, or you need some new ideas, or maybe you're starting to plan for the next year and you want to get a head start. These would be great questions to think about as you are, just on a regular basis, I would say. All right. So question number one: how is your relationship with your students really? Okay. Now, you don't have to answer this question if you're in the Zoom live on the chat. You don't need to respond to that right now. This is a reflective question. Okay. So I know for myself, when I think about my relationship with my students right now, because of course it changes in every class and in every teaching situation I have. When I think about my relationship with my students right now, my first instinct is, oh, my relationship with my students is good, right? Like they're happy when they see me, and we have good times, we laugh. Sometimes it's challenging, but we can always get through it. And all of those things are true. But if I dig a little bit deeper and I really stop to think about it, I can reflect that my relationship with some students is much stronger than with other students, and a lot of that has to do with the students themselves, right? So my very active students and my students who maybe have a little bit better English, or who are just kind of social butterflies, they often will kind of make me form a strong relationship with them, right? And I think they carry a lot of the good relationship feelings in the classroom. And then I think about some of my other quieter students, and maybe I don't know as much about them as I would like to think I do. Um, Maybe they're not quite as comfortable with me as my first impression when I walk in the classroom, right? Um, so I think this is a question that for me, when I first think about it, it's, oh yeah, I have a good relationship, right? I have a good relationship. But when I think about it more deeply, I realize, oh, it's actually much more nuanced. So relationship is so important, as we said, and taking the time to build relationships with students is essential at every point in the year. One thing I've been doing lately is just starting every lesson with um, like a social emotional check-in, right? And that way it just helps students kind of relax a little bit. It helps me know them better, and it kind of takes the intensity out of the beginning of the lesson. So I've been trying to like make little tweaks in my own teaching, but sometimes it can be overwhelming to think about how to start building that relationship, especially with students who are unmotivated. And if, maybe they don't show any interest in wanting you to know them more or getting to know you. So I have a strategy for us to try, and maybe you've heard of this before. It's called the 2 by 10 strategy. So if you have heard of this, I would love for you to say in the chat if you have. This is a fantastic strategy. It's been research proven to work. And basically, it kind of makes building student relationships, and it takes this big daunting task of trying to build a relationship with someone, and it breaks it down into a small chunk. So the idea is that you would think of a particular student, maybe someone who you have a little bit of conflict with, or someone who's very quiet and you don't know very well, someone who totally seems checked out. And you make a point to have a 2-minute conversation with that student for 10 consecutive school days, right? Um, Maybe in the Tajik system, we would say 12 consecutive school days, so that it would just be 2 straight weeks, right? Um, and the conversation doesn't need to be about school. In fact, it's better if it's not about school, because probably the conversation you are having with those students is, did you finish your work? Do you understand? That kind of thing, rather than actually getting to know them. Um, so this is great because it only requires 2 minutes of your time. You can do it when students are coming in the morning, or at the end of class, or maybe when there's independent work going on. So it's a very flexible strategy. So I'd like us to think now. And if you're in the Zoom, I would ask you to add into the chat. I'd like you to think of a student who maybe is a very quiet student, or someone who's unmotivated, someone you don't know very well. And I want you to think about some non-school related questions or topics that you could talk to them about in these 2 by 10 conversations. So go ahead and type some ideas into the chat about what kind of non-school related questions or topics could you talk to a student about who you need to build a stronger relationship with. Oh, great question. Do you dream to study abroad? Yes. I love that because that would also be maybe connecting to building their sense of relevance as well. And I'm sure you would learn a lot from that student. Oh, great. We have another answer about students' future life. Yes. So you can see when we ask students questions that aren't related to schoolwork, we can actually learn something that then not only will build our relationship with the student, but is probably going to help our teaching too, because then we're going to be able to talk to them about um, connecting what they're learning to their future goals. And Mavluda has a great question. What is your favorite time of day? I love that. That could give you a great sense of when the student is at their best, right? Maybe the student would tell you, well, I really love midnight. And then you would know, oh gosh, no wonder the student is coming in so tired every day. They're staying up too late. What do you do in your free time? Absolutely. So, thank you for all of these great ideas. Sometimes it's helpful to just think about these things in advance. So then when you go into your classroom, you're ready with some topics pre thought of. So I encourage everyone to try this starting on Monday. Why not? Or maybe you want to wait until after the school holiday. But it's a great, easy strategy. So let's go on to our next question. How much choice do students actually have in my class? So again, this is a reflective question. You don't need to answer it in the chat. But this is one that, for me, kind of hits me right in the heart because I know how important student choice is. And I would love to say that I am regularly providing students choices in the classroom. But when I reflect on my teaching right now, I can say that I am not providing students very much choice at all. Um, and it comes down a lot, I think, to just the way that I plan, um, the limitations that I feel that I have in terms of what my classroom looks like, or how students access work. And so I feel like this is a area that is difficult for me, and is one that I'm not doing so well in right now. I could do a lot better. But when I think of choice, it often is a little scary because then I start to imagine, oh gosh, students are just going to like have kind of free reign, and how am I going to make sure that they're going to choose wisely, or it's going to be so much more planning for me because then I need to make sure there's all these options in terms of how they learn something. And all of those could be true. And of course, it'd be great. And teachers do great jobs at all of those things. So that's a goal. But choice can mean so many different things. We can provide choice by letting our students choose where they sit, who they sit next to, how they work together in a group, who their partners are. Do they want to work independently or with a partner or in a collaborative group? We can give them choice about how they take something in. Do they read it? Do they listen to it? Are they going to watch something? As well as their output. Will they write? Will they show you with their body movements? How will they kind of show what they've learned? We can also give choices with timing. Maybe how much time do they have to work on something, or in what order would they choose to do the required work? So there's lots of ways we can give choices that don't necessarily it doesn't necessarily mean you have to start with providing, individualized work for every single one of your students, although certainly that could be a great goal for very motivated teachers. So I want us to think about this, and I'm going to ask you to respond in the chat again. What might be one area that you could start providing more choice in your classroom? For me, I would say work groups, because I tend to assign random work groups, or I assign them by like specific level. And so for me, I think I would choose work groups and letting them actually choose groups from time to time. Not all the time, but from time to time. So what would you choose to start with? And maybe you can say why. Seating, yes. Order of activities, great. I'd love to get better at that myself. I think that would give students a big feeling of autonomy too, because then they're actually in more direction. They're taking more direction in the class. They sit in ordinary classes face to the teacher. Yes. So with seating, um, pretty much every classroom I walk into here is set up in the same way in rows, right? And that could be a great place to start with having students asking your students, how do you want to organize the classroom? Even if you can't provide different kinds of chairs for students, which some people do, maybe you get a bean bag or you get the independent chair or you let a student stand. You could change the way desks are oriented, and it takes time to move it, but if you get your students good at moving things quickly, even if you're sharing a classroom with someone else, you could just do it in 1 minute and then change it back at the end of class. So great. Yes, students like to move too, and it's good for them to move. So, especially if you're teaching, any age, that's great. They need to move. But also, if you're teaching younger students who need like a little bit of movement time, maybe they're like distracted or something, you could actually use that as a way to kind of reset the classroom in the middle of class. Let's change how we're sitting, right? And then I just saw one more. Let's see. It's like planning, and they know from the beginning of the lesson. Yes, so that's going back to the order of activities about, having students choose in what order they learn. Perfect. All right, great. All right, so we're going to move on to the next one. And um, first, I also just want to apologize for my voice right now. I'm a little under the weather. And so that's why my voice sounds like this right now. Hopefully, you are not also dealing with spring allergies and that sort of thing in the change of weather. All right, let's move on. So, our next question is, are you relying heavily on carrots and sticks? So, carrots and sticks, this is an idiom that you may have heard before. I think it comes from horse racing, where the idea was, you can use a carrot to hang it in front of the horse to make it run faster because it wants that treat, or stick to beat the horse to make it run faster. So it's the idea of having positive or negative reinforcements. And usually, when we're talking about carrots and sticks, we're talking about extrinsic motivation, right? And in the classroom, of course, we're probably our students might not be very motivated by carrots, but yes, penalty and reward, perfect. But they are probably interested in candy or games or free time or, things like that. And then we could think of the stick or the penalty as things such as having a timeout or a phone call home to a parent. in a negative way, or being sent to the principal's office, or bad grades, right? That would, if grades are kind of hanging over students' heads, then that would also be a stick. So when I reflect on this question myself, I think that I'm not relying too heavily on it, but sometimes, especially if I know that students are really, if they get really excited by things like games or something like that, then I might start using them too much. And when we use extrinsic motivation too much, we're not building their intrinsic motivation, right? Which actually is going to help them stay motivated for the long haul. It's not that we should never use extrinsic motivators. It's okay to use things like a treat or a prize or something like that. And it certainly can be very exciting for students, but we just shouldn't only be relying on those things. And we should be working to build their intrinsic motivation more. So one idea is to actually think about how to connect your students to what they're learning through building that sense of relevance and purpose, right? So asking your students to tell you, to not just think about, but to speak about why they're learning something, right? Not just because it's in the book, but why? Why are we taking the time to learn this? And then also to connect it to their communities, right? So even if you have students learning about something from a different country, taking the time to connect it back to what's going on in their communities can help build that sense of intrinsic motivation. So let me turn it back over to you. I'd like you to think about your next topic. What are you teaching next? And I want you to put yourself in the mind of your students. What do you think your students might say if you asked them why they are learning that topic? Let's add some ideas to the chat. They need grades for their parents. I see the start of another.
Anna, so repeat the question once more.
Yes, go ahead. Yes. So think about the next topic that you're teaching and imagine that you asked your students why they should learn about it. What do you think they would say? Great. For example, I know that in my next class, we're going to be talking about um, personal traits, like physical traits and things like that. And if I ask my students why they should learn that, they might just say something like, oh, because I need to learn to speak English better or something like that. But then if I connect it more to what they actually are doing, they might be able to think about some ways that they would need that skill in the future, like applying for a job, being able to describe themselves or something like that. So I really encourage you to, take the time to ask your students why they are learning something specifically, and really get them to think beyond just the easy answer, right? Um, we, of course, there are like surface level reasons why students are going to learn X, Y, and Z topic. They need to develop their English. Exactly. That's of course a good reason. But if we can get them to dial down and actually think about how they're going to use that in their lives, then that might help them develop more of that sense of connection, right? Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. And I'm just having a little bit of technical difficulty here, but hopefully I'm figuring this out. Give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. Okay. So our next question is, do your words contribute to a fixed or growth mindset in your classroom? So you may be familiar with the idea of fixed or growth mindset. Basically, it's the difference between whether or not you believe that it's possible to get better at something, or if you believe that certain people are just naturally good at something, right? So if you have a fixed mindset, you might have the opinion, well, I would never be good at basketball because I'm not tall enough, or something like that. Whereas growth mindset is, if I practice doing layups for, 10 minutes every day, then I'm going to get better at doing basketball, right? So that's the idea. And one idea for us to use here is to think about the words that we use, right? So as teachers, the words we use are so powerful with our students. And it can be easy to just rely on saying things like, great job, good job, well done, 100%, things like that. But we should think about how our words can help create a growth mindset in our students. So for example, on one hand here, we see the comment, you're so smart. But if we're complimenting how intelligent a student is, that's really like a fixed mindset compliment. We're complimenting something that's inherent within them, not something that they're putting effort into, really, right? So instead, we might say something like, you worked really hard to learn this, right? Another example is, you need to study more. Well, that doesn't really give our student any idea of what to do, right? An unmotivated student, or a student who's not very successful in school, might not understand what that means. What does it mean that I have to study more? And so for them, that's just like, okay, yeah, I'm bad. I'm not good at this. That's fixed mindset. Whereas we can give them feedback that's very specific that will help them understand what step they need to take next, such as take the time to read the text 2 times before answering. That helps give them something concrete that they can use. So I'd like you to think about one of your unmotivated students, or a student that might be struggling in your class. And I'd like us to take a minute in the chat and to think about what kind of growth mindset feedback, such as the example you see here, could you give that student? Try to picture a specific student in your mind so that the feedback can be specific. What growth mindset feedback could you give them to help them improve in class? You're doing progress in learning this. Good job. Yes. I love that because that helps them see that they're making strides in learning, and we could even make that more powerful by including feedback, showing them, look, last week you wrote this and you made that error, but this week you wrote it without the error, or this week you gave me 2 reasons to support your idea instead of no reasons, right? So we can give them specific ideas. So I'd really encourage you to think about that when you're talking to students. Your words really matter. And the more specific we can be with them, we're helping kind of train them through our language. So it's much better to be specific rather than be general with our students when it comes to the feedback we give them. All right. In the interest of time, I'll move us on to our last question to ask ourselves about student motivation. And that is, what are you doing to make... Does someone have a comment? Yes.
Yes,
Go ahead,
it's
Satvik.
me.
Yes. Hello.
Can
Hello,
you
dear.
hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hello, Anna. Can you hear me?
Your audio is cutting out a
Anna.
little bit. Yes. Hello, Sadbarg.
Yeah. Hello, Anna. It's very nice to be here in your webinar. I'm a little bit
Thank you.
late, but I want to answer the last question. So you talked about the like giving the motivation, yes, to the students, like
Mhm.
about the mindset. Uh, I when you asked this question, I immediately remembered what my student, uh, whom I had in my class. So I remember him that when we started our lesson, the first lessons when he came to course, so he had a situation when he said something wrongly, and when someone like laughed at it, when someone corrected him immediately. So I remember that he next time he kind of cared some kind of mistake, like or he didn't want to answer the letter, or because he thought that he can make a mistake. Then at that time, I said to my student that whenever your classmate is talking, do not laugh, and I try to make no smile, and whenever they say something wrong, at the end I told them the word, and also I do not like when I say immediately the um, this student when you correct time next will be uh, they will rate a mistake, and when the lesson will over, I to the student who may take student with him, I said not afraid. So if you have any problem with the writing or try to be prepared, and I don't hate when the and I after he wasn't ashamed. He also was prepared before the lessons. But
Great.
the motivation were well done. I was to in order to
Thank you so much.
motivate them.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Sadbarg. You were starting to cut out there a little bit at the end, but I think what you were talking about was that when students were kind of laughing at each other if someone made a mistake, or if someone said something wrong, that you were taking the time to help your students learn better how to respond to one another. And that's also a really great
Yeah.
point, that we can teach our students to have this growth mindset language with themselves and with their classmates, right? And it shouldn't only be something that's coming from the teacher. We can teach our students to actually use growth mindset language in their lives, and that will give them such a benefit. It will help them feel better, and it will help them become more autonomous and better learners. So thank you so much for sharing that. So our last
Thank you.
question for ourselves is, what are you doing to make content relevant for your students' lives? So what are you doing to connect the content to what your students are going through and what they care about? So of course, this goes back to making relationships with our students. The more we know our students, then we can connect better to what they're going through and what they care about. When I reflect on this question, I think this is something that I do spend a lot of time thinking about. I think I do better in this area than in some others. For example, when I think about my next topic, that we have to learn about characteristics of people, right? So I tried to think about, well, when would students actually really use that? Of course, they need it to get better at English, but for example, if you're applying for a job or something like that, then you definitely need to be able to speak about yourself and your traits and that sort of thing. And that's something that my students will be having to do very soon. So I think there's always a deeper way that we can connect what students are learning to their actual lives. So here are some ideas for how we might do that with our students. These ideas are called self-generation. So one thing you can do is you can actually have sort of an exit ticket at the end of a lesson to ask students to either speak to a partner or to write about how what they're learning connects to their life. Or you can do the second option, which I like a lot, where you would have them write a list of topics that you have studied and then write a list of their personal goals. So you have on one side topics and on the other side goals. And then they would draw lines to connect the topic to their life goal. And after they've connected them, then you could have students speak or talk about, speak or write about those connections, right? And that's pretty fun activity that you can try. And it's also a great review activity, maybe at the end of the year when you've gone through many topics. So I would encourage you to think about that and how you can get students,
So,
it shouldn't only
yeah,
be us. Yes, go ahead.
Can you please bring any example for the second, like, what's relevant? What can we make, like, an example topic and some relevant there in lives?
Um, yes. So, for example, let's say that some topics that you've learned in class have to do with like travel, food, um, you know, higher education, things like that, right? So students would list the topics on one side, and then on the other side, they would write their personal goals. So, for example, to travel the world, to be a great guide for visitors who come to my city, to learn new strategies for teaching English, whatever their goals might be, right? And then you would actually have them draw lines to connect the goal with the topic. So a student might draw a line to connect, oh, when I learned about travel, that helped me be able to speak more clearly and with more fluency for when I have visitors come here or when I meet foreigners in my city, right? So they'd be connecting those two things from their own mind, not from us telling them, it's important that you learn this, right? Okay. So we talked about a lot of different ways to support student motivation. So I'm going to go back to that slide from the middle of the presentation about um, these different ways that we should be trying to support student motivation through positive relationships, choice, and helping students believe they can learn, developing that sense of competency. So what I encourage you to do, since we've gone through these 5 questions, I encourage you to just choose one area to think about, because we know that we have a responsibility to help students become more motivated and that we can make changes in our own classroom to help them improve. But it doesn't have to happen all overnight. So really just choose one area to start and make a small adjustment. Maybe you start giving students a choice with seating, or maybe you start asking your students to think about why they're learning something more. Maybe you try the 2x10 strategy. And I hope that with that, we can all kind of leave with the idea that there are things we can do without overwhelming ourselves to help our students be more motivated. So I think we need to leave a little time for questions. So yes, I see some questions in the chat. And if anyone else has some questions they'd like to talk about before we end. Input, output mode. Okay, so I think what this is referring to, I'll go back to that slide. This has to do with giving students choice. So when we think about choice with input mode, that's thinking about choice, different ways to take in information. So for example, reading is an input mode. Listening to a teacher is another input mode. Listening to a podcast on your own is another input mode. Watching a video or, that something visual, these are all input modes. So we can give students choices and variety with the different types of input modes we allow them. And then output mode is how they show us that they're learning. They demonstrate what they've learned. So again, we can give choices with output mode. Instead of just giving our students a worksheet and saying, fill in the blanks, we can say, okay, make a short movie to tell me about what you learned. Make a voice recording, write it down, do an interpretive dance to show me what you've learned. All these, there's many, many different ways that we can give students choices about the output, do a drawing. So that is what is meant by input and output mode. Are there any other questions?
Anna, thank you so much. That was really great. Should we just start and open the floor to question and answers? I guess then
Yes.
others will also unmute themselves and ask their questions.
Great. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So, as you can see here, in what ways can English lessons be tailored to include students' diverse cultural backgrounds to boost their intrinsic motivation?
Okay. And is this a question for me or a question for open to the floor?
So you and then if anybody would like also just to expand on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yes, let me read that question again. In what ways can English lessons be tailored to include students' diverse cultural backgrounds to boost their intrinsic motivation? That's a great question. And I think in every classroom, we have students with diverse cultural backgrounds, even, in places where there might be a majority of one certain group of students. Like everyone is coming from a different family culture. Everyone is coming from a different history, right? So I think, first of all, we need to try to learn about our students' diverse cultural backgrounds through talking to them, through inviting them to bring in parts of their own family history or family culture, depending on the topic, right? And I do think when students can see themselves in what we're teaching, that can be motivating, because it's not very motivating to just look at examples of other very far away people who don't seem very much like you, and to see yourself in that. So I think the more that we can bring examples that are closer to our students' lives, either through like what they actually do for their daily routines, or through people who look or are from a background like them, that can be very motivating for students because it enhances that sense of connection and that sense of belonging as well. I'd love to hear what other people have to say too, if there are other responses.
Okay, thank you. If anybody would like to expand and share your experience on that question, please go ahead. Okay, if not, then we can jump to the next question. So Bakhti Begim Madrayanova is asking, did you have any situation that encouraged your student to set their goals for learning English? And if yes, how?
Yeah, great question. And yes, I've definitely done this before. And I think ideally in every class, I would do this. And I'm sure there are other teachers in the meeting right now that have really great examples of how they encourage students to set goals. Something I've done in the past that was nice for me because it kind of let me get to know a very large group of students was that I did like kind of a stand up, sit down activity with students where I came up with some statements like, I want to learn English because I want to be able to make friends with people who speak English, because I want to have a bilingual job in the future, because I want to travel. I made like several reasons. And then I did it as a whole class activity where I would say the statement and then students would stand up if it was true for them, or sit down if it wasn't. And that gave me kind of like a quick overview of goals in the classroom. And then after that, I had students write about the top 3 goals that were most important to them. And then later we kind of took those goals and thought about like steps they could take to reach those goals in my class. And so that was kind of a nice, effective way that I got a good overview of the goals of my students in class. And then I also had them start kind of thinking more deeply about what do they need to do to get there. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, that's really great. So, couple of other questions just are the same way. I mean, also very similar. So anyway, like it's really great. But if you also could share some of your favorite ways how you help your students to stay motivated when they encounter some difficulties in learning English, because some easy topics are easy to learn, but some difficult topics students struggle, and it sometimes demotivates them because they say like, I never figure out how to learn that, or something like that.
Yeah, I think for me, definitely trying to cultivate a sense of growth mindset. I am very anti-perfection in any classroom, and especially the English learning classroom or language learning classroom. I feel like students come a lot with these ideas that they have to be perfect, that they have to be speaking without an accent or without making any grammar mistakes. And to me, that just doesn't make any sense because, accents are great and everyone makes grammar mistakes, and we can learn from them. So I think trying to really cultivate a sense that you don't have to be perfect and you can still reach your goals. So trying to show students that even if you're not perfect, here, let's do an activity that shows you that you can use the language that you have to accomplish a conversation or something like that. I think that helps build up students' self-confidence as well. And when you have self-confidence and believe you can, that's motivating.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And that's really great because sometimes, like, some of the teachers really, like to point out the mistakes all the time,
Mhm.
which really
Yeah,
discourages students to learn. Yeah, exactly.
definitely. I really try to not interrupt students when they're
Mhm.
speaking personally, because I it doesn't help with communication at all, right? And communication is the goal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much, Diana. Like, once again, this was really interesting, and thank you for sharing your strategies that you usually use and also just great insights. And dear all, we'll be sharing this webinar on our um, Facebook, so it will be visible. So you can just, if you missed the webinar, you can still watch it afterwards. And of course, the webinar materials will be shared with through our website. So we'll be posting them very soon. Thank you so much once again. Thank you for your active participation, and thank you so much, Diana. So please get well. I know,
Thank you. I know,
me
sorry
too.
for
I'm
my
just having some cold as well, so don't worry. Yeah, just stay well, and wishing once again to all of you happy Women's Day and enjoy your holidays. And see you next week at our Thursday webinars. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.